Administration planning a new mission to target drug cartels in Mexico. This is all according to 4 current and former U.S. officials familiar with that effort.
In this fictional thriller, Texas is jolted awake when an FBI investigation uncovers a shocking betrayal from within the ranks of law enforcement. What begins as a quiet surveillance operation in the desert suddenly erupts into a high-stakes confrontation with a convoy of corrupt officers escorting a massive fentanyl load tied to a powerful cartel network. As agents move in, the situation spirals into chaos, revealing layers of deception no one expected. The fallout spreads fast, exposing deep fractures inside multiple departments and forcing an unprecedented shutdown of 34 police stations across the state. At its core, this story explores trust, courage, and the emotional toll on agents who must confront the unthinkable. Enemies wearing the same uniform they swore to honor the first signs of a hidden crisis. In this fictional retelling, the earliest signs of trouble surface not through dramatic events, but through subtle inconsistencies. Vehicle movements that don't match patrol routes, unexplained gaps in reporting, and suspicious transfers of seized materials that fail to appear in evidence logs. Federal agents monitoring routine activity begin to see patterns that raise concern, prompting a deeper look into what initially appears to be a minor smuggling investigation. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the problem lies not in the desert convoys themselves, but in who is escorting them. Certain officers, entrusted with public safety, appear to have crossed ethical boundaries. Instead of focusing on exaggerated criminal detail, the narrative emphasizes the shock experienced by investigators who discover that individuals wearing badges may have knowingly allowed misconduct to thrive. This early discovery triggers a larger analysis of how corruption begins quietly and grows when oversight weakens. A quiet investigation becomes a statewide operation. The fictional investigation expands rapidly once federal agencies realize that inconsistencies in reports and surveillance footage point to coordinated misconduct rather than isolated mistakes. Behind-the-scenes conversations between departments, field interviews, and data reviews reveal that the issue is more extensive than anyone expected. In response, larger agencies step in, creating a unified task force whose mission is not to assign blame, but to understand the full scope of the problem. The tone of this phase is calm but tense. Investigators feel the weight of uncovering truth while trying to avoid sparking public panic. As the operation grows, the task force temporarily suspends several facilities to prevent interference while evidence is collected. This statewide effort marks a turning point, demonstrating how quickly routine cases can transform into major accountability missions when warning signs are taken seriously. Federal agents uncover a network of misconduct. As investigators analyze documents, communication logs, and administrative records, they begin uncovering a fictional network of employees who may have violated protocols for personal gain or under external pressure. The focus is not on portraying dramatic criminal acts, but on exploring how small choices, ignored warnings, unreported gifts, or unauthorized access can escalate into systemic problems. Interviews reveal a culture in certain departments where ethical boundaries blurred over time, creating openings that external groups could exploit. The network is revealed not through explosive raids, but through diligent, methodical review conducted by analysts working long hours to connect overlooked details. By the time the network is mapped out, investigators understand that the story is less about wrongdoing itself and more about the subtle erosion of standards that allowed it to take root. This section highlights the importance of transparency in preventing similar failures in the future. Past lessons from other cities resurface. The fictional narrative reflects on earlier periods in major U.S. cities where misconduct and mismanagement challenged public trust. Rather than depicting sensational criminal events, the story focuses on historical lessons, how communities struggled with strained relationships between residents and law enforcement, how good officers often felt overshadowed by a few who broke their oaths, and how reform efforts required persistence and honesty. Retired officers and former investigators recount past failures that grew from long-term cultural issues rather than sudden incidents. By revisiting these earlier struggles, the story provides context for the current crisis, showing that corruption does not emerge suddenly. It grows from gaps in oversight, lapses in accountability, and systems that fail to support ethical leadership. These reflections help characters and readers understand how the present situation mirrors unresolved issues from decades before. A look at institutional vulnerabilities. This section explores how structural weaknesses within fictional law enforcement systems made it easier for misconduct to spread. Rather than blaming individuals alone, the narrative takes a broader view. Outdated monitoring tools, insufficient background checks, overextended supervisors, and limited whistleblower protections. These vulnerabilities allowed certain employees to bypass safeguards without immediate detection. The story humanizes the challenge by showing how overwhelmed officers, administrative fatigue, and resource shortages contribute to environments where ethical concerns are overlooked. Other employees describe how subtle pressures, fears of retaliation, cultural expectations of loyalty, or reluctance to challenge superiors kept them silent even when something felt wrong. By spotlighting these systemic issues, the section underlines that corruption is not merely a moral failure, but also an organizational failure, and lasting reform must address both the human and structural components. How external criminal groups exploited weak points. In this fictionalized context, outside criminal groups gain influence not through violence or dramatic confrontations, but through quiet manipulation of institutional blind spots. They identify employees who appear financially strained, professionally overlooked, or isolated in their roles. Through seemingly harmless offers, favor exchanges, social connections, or routine partnerships, they gradually build influence. The story avoids harmful depictions and instead focuses on how external groups use subtle persuasion rather than force to gain footholds. Investigators later learn that these groups mapped out organizational weaknesses with the same care corporations use to study markets. Once inside, they amplified vulnerabilities, creating pipelines through paperwork, misfiled reports, or unnoticed approvals. This section emphasizes how corruption often develops through gradual erosion rather than overt threats, showing how important early detection and ethical support systems are in preventing manipulation. The emotional impact on officers and communities. When the fictional investigation becomes public, the reaction among honest officers and community members is defined by disappointment rather than shock. Many feel betrayed not by the discovery itself, but by the idea that misconduct occurred in places they trusted. Officers who upheld their duty feel overshadowed by the actions of colleagues who prioritized personal gain over public service. Community members express sorrow in public forums, concerned not only about safety, but about the loss of faith in people sworn to protect them. This section avoids harmful depictions and instead portrays the emotional complexity. Empathy for those who worked with integrity, frustration toward those who enabled wrongdoing, and exhaustion for families who rely on institutions to stay stable. The shared sentiment is not anger alone, but grief, a recognition that rebuilding trust requires time, transparency, and genuine accountability. Leadership responds to an unfolding crisis. In this fictional storyline, leaders at state and local levels step forward to address the crisis openly. Instead of offering simplistic solutions or placing blame, They acknowledge institutional shortcomings and commit to reform. A central figure, perhaps the governor or a major city's police chief, holds a press conference marked by calm honesty rather than political performance. They outline plans for independent audits, new oversight committees, and improved training programs designed to prevent misconduct from resurfacing. Their message is clear. Mistakes were made, harm was done, and meaningful change is necessary. This moment brings together community members, federal partners, and ethical officers who recognize that rebuilding faith in public systems requires humility and sustained action. The leadership response becomes a turning point, demonstrating that accountability can coexist with empathy and that institutions can heal when transparency becomes the guiding principle. Rebuilding systems from the inside out. Following the fictional scandal, agencies begin implementing reforms centered on ethics, transparency, and support for whistleblowers. Supervisors receive updated training, officers undergo renewed certification processes, and outdated procedures are replaced with modern monitoring systems. Departments collaborate with community groups to ensure policies reflect local needs rather than internal convenience. This rebuilding effort is intentional and slow, focusing on changing culture rather than applying quick fixes. Employees who previously felt powerless to challenge unethical behavior are given new reporting pathways, and community oversight committees begin participating in operational reviews. The narrative emphasizes the human side of reform, people learning from failure, recognizing their blind spots, and committing to creating systems that support accountability, federal collaboration, and long-term strategy. In this fictional world, federal agencies deepen their partnerships with state institutions to ensure long-term stability and prevent future vulnerabilities. Rather than emphasizing enforcement alone, they focus on resource sharing, improved tracking technologies, and interdepartmental communication channels that reduce the chance of unnoticed misconduct. Analysts coordinate intelligence flows more efficiently, and cross-agency task forces meet regularly to discuss emerging risks. Training programs integrate ethical decision-making, mental health support, and scenarios based on past failures. The narrative reframes federal involvement as cooperative rather than punitive, highlighting how partnerships can strengthen local institutions when built on trust and mutual respect. Key characters reflect on the importance of looking beyond immediate arrests or suspensions, focusing instead on creating a sustainable model of governance, where institutions remain resilient even when tested by internal or external pressures. Public awareness and community participation. As reforms unfold, the fictional community becomes more engaged, realizing that public institutions function best when citizens remain informed and involved. Neighborhood associations host forums where residents ask questions, voice concerns, and suggest improvements. Families share personal stories about how the scandal affected their sense of safety, deepening conversations about transparency and trust. Schools incorporate civic education programs that teach students about accountability and ethical leadership. Local organizations partner with law enforcement to support youth programs, conflict prevention, and outreach initiatives that strengthen community relationships. This section highlights how meaningful recovery is a shared effort, not just an institutional project. By participating actively, residents help ensure that reforms are guided by real experiences rather than bureaucratic assumptions, building a stronger foundation for future cooperation between the public and the institutions designed to protect them. A new culture of accountability emerges over time. The fictional agencies begin to reflect the changes implemented after the scandal. Officers speak more openly about ethical concerns, leaders model transparency, and accountability becomes a valued part of departmental culture rather than an obligation. New protocols ensure that unusual activity is flagged early, and communication between divisions improves significantly. The story highlights small but powerful moments: an officer reporting a concerning observation, a supervisor encouraging a junior colleague to speak up, a community member receiving timely updates about reforms. These interactions signal that change is not only structural, but cultural. While challenges persist, the agency moves toward a healthier identity built on mutual respect and integrity. This section reinforces the idea that accountability is not a one-time initiative, but an ongoing commitment that strengthens institutions and builds long-lasting trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. A final reflection on vigilance and integrity. The narrative concludes by emphasizing that corruption rarely begins with dramatic choices. It begins with small compromises, overlooked details, and systems that fail to adapt. The fictional events serve as a reminder that integrity requires ongoing attention, and institutions must continuously evaluate their weaknesses to prevent future breaches. Characters reflect on how easily trust can erode, and how painstakingly it must be rebuilt. At the same time, the story honors the individuals, officers, analysts, community members, and leaders who worked diligently to restore stability. Their commitment demonstrates that while corruption can infiltrate institutions, integrity can repair them when people choose honesty over silence. The final reflection focuses on hope, a belief that through vigilance, compassion, and transparent governance, communities can emerge stronger after facing difficult truths, creating systems better prepared to protect the public good.